There is an old saying among the toll clerks of the canal country that a fine hand may fare a column and a great name may swear to it, but a sum will only ever tell you what it truly is. For a gentleman will believe whatever his eye is pleased to read, and a farthing of honest account cares nothing for who owns the book. And the whole art of an honest reckoning is to know the one from the other. Honoria Vane had read to the old Dowager Duchess of Ashworth for 11 years, and no one above the rank of housekeeper had troubled to learn her name. She was 40 when the story properly begins. A spare, plain, upright woman with ink-stained fingers and a level gray gaze that could hold a running total across a page of small figures. Dark hair going early to gray beneath a plain cap. She had been born over her father's counting house in the canal town of Marlbrook, and learned her whole trade before she could keep house. She held no office the family would have recognized, and drew no wage above an upper servant's. She fetched the dowager's shawls, and read her the sermons and the novels she no longer had the eyes for, and sat the long afternoons in the corner of the morning room while the great of the county were served their tea, and never once looked at the gray woman by the window. She was the person the household thought of, when it thought of her at all, as one thinks of the clock on the stair, and it was understood that Miss Vane was steady, and had a head for figures, and no more than that. The afternoon the new Duke's canal accounts came up to the house, she was in the morning room with the dowager's mending basket, and did not think herself concerned in it at all. "You'll not even take a peep?" said young Bess Coker, the still room maid grown to a quick-handed under-clerk, hanging in the doorway with her cap askew and her cheeks red from the stairs. "There's the great canal book come up from the counting-house, all bound in green, and Mr. Belcher himself carrying it in to his grace like it was the parish Bible, and telling him what a fortune the navigation's turned this year. Every toll and tonnage new cast to the very farthing. They say his grace means to sign it off this week, and have done. Won't you come and see, Miss Vane? He hasn't brought it up to be looked at by the woman who reads her grace her sermons," Honoria said, without lifting her eyes from the needle. "And this heap of the dowager's stockings will not darn itself while I stand in the counting-house to be nodded past. Go and gawp, Bess, since you want it so, and finger nothing, for trusted steward or no. They'll blame the reading desk first if aught's smudged. They say Mr. Belcher's the soundest steward in 3 counties, Bess went on, undeterred, twisting her apron. "The old Duke set the whole estate in his hands and never questioned a line of it in 20 years. Cook says his grace means to give him a rise for putting the poor tangled business in such fine order after the sad time." "Cook says a great deal," said Honoria, "and has never once cast a column of tolls in her life. A judge of an account, if he's a true one, feels the wrongness of a doctored book in the adding of it and not only in the reading, for the eye is easily pleased and a total never lies. Now hold your noise, you'll make me lose my count. 14 ton, at 3 pence the ton, less the halfpenny rebate. 14 ton, at 3 pence the ton, less the halfpenny rebate." She was wrong about that, as it happened, but not for 11 days. In those 11 days the household learned its new master sidelong, in scraps carried up to the morning room. He did not bluster. That was the first thing they said of him, and they said it uneasily, for a blustering master can be managed, but a quiet, exacting one keeps his own counsel. He shut himself in the muniment room half the day with the deeds and the leases, and came away with a face like a closed book. He had set himself to put right everything a careless line of owners and a long, easy stewardship had let slide, so the name of Ashworth should stand again as it had stood. It was a proud grief and a lonely one, and it made him easy prey. On the 11th day, the errand fell to Honoria by the plainest chance in the world, which is how the largest things in a life generally come. The Dowager Duchess, a shrewd, imperious, failing old woman of 81 who missed nothing that passed near her chair, took it into her head that she would know what her grandson's precious canal truly earned, since the whole county talked of it, and no one told her anything. "Bring me a fair abstract of the thing, Vane," she said, rapping her stick. "The quarterly figures, copied plain, in a hand I can read, none of Belcher's flourishes. I nursed this estate through my husband's dotage and my son's follies, and I'll not be kept in the dark about its business in my own house by a steward who bows too low. Go down and copy me out the last 4 quarters, and let me see for myself whether Adrian's being managed." So Honoria went down to the counting-house with the dowager's warrant in her hand, and Mr. Belcher's underclerk set her the great green quarterly abstract at the far end of the long baize table, with a candle and a stack of paper, and left her to copy it, thinking her only the old lady's amanuensis, come for a fair copy and no one to trouble about. And Honoria Vane, copying the abstract out plain for the dowager in the long quiet of the sunlit counting-house, began, because she could not help it, because a column of figures under her pen was a thing her hand added of its own accord whether she willed it or no, to read what she copied. It was the rebate that stopped her. She had copied out the tolls quarter by quarter, the coal and the lime and the timber, the tonnage over the ducal wharf, all fair and full, and against the whole she had copied the standing entry, plain as a milepost: toll relief allowed to canal side tenants, per founding deed, paid in full. A halfpenny in the penny off every ton the estate's own tenants sent down the water. A rebate the present Duke's own elder brother had granted the poor canal side holdings in the founding deed of the cut, that they might carry their lime and coal to market and not be beggared by the tolls on their own landlord's water. Paid in full, said the book, quarter after quarter, in a fair, confident hand. She knew they had not had it. She knew, because Widow Thorne of the Lime Wharf cottages had wept in the still room not a month since over the toll that was eating her little trade alive, and Honoria had thought it only the woman's hard luck, and because the canal side men had petitioned the estate twice in 2 years for the relief they said had been promised, and never came, and been told by the steward's office that they were paid every farthing they were due and should be ashamed to beg for more. Paid in full, said the book, and the tenants swore and wept that they had never seen a farthing of it. Both could not be true. And a woman who had been raised at a toll clerk's desk knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that when a book swears a thing is paid, and the poor souls it was paid to swear it never came, the truth is not in the swearing on either side. It is in the day book. It is in the running total. It is in the plain arithmetic of the toll taken at the wharf against the rebate entered in the office. And one of those 2 figures is a lie. She did not say a word of it. She finished her fair copy for the dowager, and carried it up, and the old lady peered at it and grunted, and supposed Belcher earned his keep. And Honoria said, "Yes, your grace," and went to her narrow room, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark a long while, turning it over, the way her father had taught her to turn a doubtful account over before ever laying a pen to accusing it, quietly, giving it every chance to prove itself honest, because the worst thing a reckoner can do is cry theft at a sum that only wants adding right. And the next morning she went, not to the Duke, and not to the steward, but to Dunmore. Dunmore was the Duke's own man, a lean, grave, spare person of perhaps 55, who had been body servant to the old Duke and then to the elder son and now to this one, and had the still watchfulness of a man who had spent 40 years in great houses seeing everything and saying almost nothing. She found him alone in the little room where he kept the Duke's linen, and stood in the doorway with her hands folded, a plain gray woman he had passed 1,000 times and never truly seen. Mr. Dunmore, she said, I am Miss Vane that reads to her grace. I have a thing to tell you that is not my place to tell, and that you had best forget if I am wrong. I have copied the canal abstract for the Dowager, and in the copying of it I have seen something I do not like, and dare not carry higher, being nobody. So I have come to ask you what an honest servant does, that has seen a thing he cannot prove, and dares not name. Dunmore set down the neckcloth he was folding, and looked at her a long, still moment, with his grave gray eyes. Sit down, Miss Vane, he said. I have served in this house 40 years, and I have learned to know the two kinds of trouble that come to a door, the kind that is spite dressed as duty, and the kind that is duty and frightened of itself. You have the second look. Tell me what you have seen. On my own head, and no fault of yours. So she told him. She told it plainly, the way her father had taught her to lay an account before a doubting man, not the conclusion first, but the figures, the rebate entered paid in full, 4 years deep, the tenants who swore and wept it never came, the 2 petitions turned away at the steward's office, and the plain, cold fact that both could not be true, and that she could not settle, which without the toll clerk's day book, the wharf's own daily record of every ton weighed and every toll taken, that no fair abstract can lie about, because it is written as the carts come. And why do you not simply take it to his grace, said Dunmore, watching her, if you are so sure? Because I am not yet sure, and a servant that says her master's been robbed by his own trusted steward had best be very sure, or she is a slandering fool turned off without a character, said Honoria. If I go up and say his steward's a thief, whose word does he take? The sound man his own father trusted, or the old lady's reader he has never once addressed? He turns me off by dinner and warns Belcher I've been prying, and the day book is burned by candlelight, and the poor souls at the lime wharf go on beggared. But I cannot unsee it. There is a rebate in that book, promised by the young master that's dead to the poorest tenants this estate has, entered paid and not paid, and someone is the richer by it every quarter. And I was raised at a desk that taught me the one thing I have ever truly known, that a farthing wrongly placed will not lie quiet, however fair the hand that hides it, and I cannot go back to darning stockings and pretend I never added the column. His grace, he said at last, slowly, is exact past all reason. It is his grief turned inward. He was the second son, never meant for any of this, and he came home to find the great name half managed by a steward his brother trusted and never checked, and he cannot rest till every line of it is squared. If you took him a proven wrong, proven mind, past his power to doubt it, he would move heaven to right it, though it cost him his oldest servant and a county scandal. But he will not move on a suspicion, nor on a companion's word against a steward's, and no more would I ask him to. He looked at her. What would you need, Miss Vane, to make it proof past doubting? The toll clerk's day book, said Honoria, for the 4 years since the founding deed. The tenants' own crossed receipts that show what toll they truly paid at the wharf, and the founding deed itself, that sets down in the young master's own hand the rebate he promised. So no one can say afterward there was never such a relief to pay. Set those 3 beside Belcher's fair abstract in a good north light, and cross-add the one against the other, and a stolen rebate has nowhere left in the world to hide. But I'll not do it in a corner, for a thing done in secret can be called a spiteful lie after. I'll do it in the open, on the great table, where his grace himself may watch every figure I cast, and let Mr. Belcher be sent for to watch, so that no one may say I found it where it could be doubted. I would have the whole world watch, if the room were big enough, said Honoria. A false account fears nothing but daylight and an honest eye. It thrives on a trusted name and a locked drawer and a master too grieved to add it up. And it dies the moment a person who knows the trade sets the daybook against the abstract in the open. But I cannot fetch the daybook. Mr. Dunmore, that is the steward's, and locked. That, if His Grace will hear this at all, is the one thing only His Grace can command. Wait here, he said. Say nothing to any soul, and above all nothing to the steward's office, for a man who has hidden a theft will hide it deeper the moment he smells an honest eye. I have watched 100 stewards and clerks and companions come and go, and I know an honest reckoner when one stands frightened in my doorway telling the truth against her own safety. I am going up to His Grace. On my own head, wait here, and pray I have not misjudged him. For if I have, we are both of us turned off by dark. The muniment room at Ashworth ran off the counting house at the north end of the offices, a bright, high room of tall arched windows and polished oak, ranked the length of it with the great ledgers of the estate, and, along one wall, the pigeon-holed deed boxes and the brass-bound strong-box where the founding papers were kept, and Honoria had never in 11 years been asked to set foot in it. She was sent for at last, and came in with her hands folded, and there stood the Duke of Ashworth by the long baize table, with the great green abstract open before him, and Dunmore grave at his shoulder. He was a tall, spare, still man of perhaps 42, dark-haired, with a fine, austere face worn thin by a grief he did not show, and gray eyes that rested on her with neither disdain nor curiosity, but only a cool, closed wariness, the guarded stillness of a man who has been alone with a great sorrow and a great resolve, and does not care to be interrupted in either. He looked at the plain gray-capped woman as she came in, and his voice when he spoke was low and level and exact, with no warmth in it and no unkindness either, only the flat control of a man who has taught himself to give nothing away. You are the woman who reads to my grandmother, he said. Dunmore tells me you have been copying the canal abstract and that you say there is a theft in it. He is a man I trust, or I would not have let you pass that door. But he is a valet and no reckoner, and he tells me he believed you because of how you were afraid. That is not evidence, mistress. That is a feeling. So I will ask you plainly, and you will answer me plainly, or you will go back to my grandmother's sermons, and we will both forget this hour. What is it you say you have found? I have found nothing yet, your grace, that I can prove, said Honoria. I have found a question, and it is the one question no one in this house has troubled to ask, because everyone has trusted the man instead of adding the book. That checked him. He had expected fright, or fawning, or a wild servant's accusation he could dismiss in a breath, and she had given him none of it. A question, he repeated. An account, your grace, is only as true as the day book it's drawn from. A man may fare a column beautifully and enter every rebate paid in full, and a gentleman's eye will take its oath on it. But whether the toll he wrote was the toll truly taken at the wharf, and whether the rebate he entered paid was ever paid to a living soul, those he cannot fake out of an inkpot, for they must answer to the daybook written as the carts came, and to the receipts the tenants keep, and to the deed that says what was owed. An abstract is a sum, and a sum must close, or it is a lie in the shape of one. Your late brother promised the canal side tenants a rebate in the founding deed, a halfpenny in the penny off every ton, and your book swears it paid in full these 4 years. And the tenants swear, and have petitioned this house twice, that they have never seen a farthing of it. Both cannot be true. And the difference is not going to your tenants, and I should like to know where it is going, and so I think should you. The muniment room was very quiet. The Duke of Ashworth stood looking at her, and something moved behind the closed gray eyes. Not warmth, but the flat, testing attention of a man who has just heard, from the last quarter he looked for it, a note with the ring of truth in it. "My brother's rebate," he said, and for the first time the level voice had the smallest catch in it. "You have read my brother's deed. I have read only what the abstract copies of it, which is that the relief is allowed and paid. The deed itself is in your strong-box. But I have darned the stockings of the widow at the lime wharf, who is being eaten alive by a toll your book says she has had relief from. And I have heard the canal-side men turned from your steward's office with the word that they are paid every farthing. And I was raised at a canal toll clerk's desk before the company failed and broke my father, and I know the smell of a rebate collected in full and entered as returned, the way you would know your own brother's hand. Set the daybook and the receipts and the deed beside the abstract, and let me cast them in the open. And perhaps I'll find every farthing paid as your book swears. But you asked what I have found, and I have told you. A rebate your dead brother promised the poorest souls on your estate, entered paid and not paid, and I mean to know where it went. And so should any man who cares what name he signs. I have not called him a thief, your grace. I have called the book wrong. Whether it is theft or blundering, the day book will say, and I will not, for I deal in figures and not in men. But I will tell you this, and then you may send me back to my sermons if you please. A false account thrives on exactly one thing. A great man too grieved and too busy to add up his own book, who trusts the fair hand because it is the hand he has always trusted, and never asks the plain hard question of the wharf. You have been that man these 11 weeks, and no shame to you, for you are new to it and drowning in your brother's tangles. But the rebate does not care that you are grieved. It goes on being stolen every quarter you do not add it up. Deny me, and I'll go back to her grace's shawls and say no more, for it is your estate and none of mine, and your brother's promise to keep or break, and not mine. Cast it, he said, tomorrow here, in this good north light, and I will be present, and Dunmore, and Mr. Belcher, whom I will send for tonight, for by God I will have the man who kept the book answer to my face. I will command the day book from the wharf and the receipts from any tenant who will lend them, and open my brother's deed with my own key. And if you are right, then I have been robbed under my own roof, while my brother's promise to the poor was broken in my name. And I will owe you a debt I do not like to owe. And if you are wrong, and have slandered a good servant of 20 years' standing before my household on a companion's fancy, it will be on my head that I let you, and I will not forgive you. Do you understand me? Perfectly, your grace, said Honoria Vane. Then we had best make certain I am right. Let me have the abstract and my father's counting rule tonight, and the day book and the deed and what receipts you can gather by morning, and I'll have every quarter cast by tomorrow's dusk, and lay it before you all where it cannot be doubted, or own myself mistaken, which I have done before and lived. She was right. It is worth saying plainly, because the household did not believe it for a month and the Duke did not believe it for longer, that she was simply, unglamorously right, in the way competence is right. She spent the last of that day's light and the whole of the night over the books, at the long baize table in the muniment room, with her father's worn brass counting rule and his old canal day book propped for a model beside her, and Dunmore, who would not leave her to it alone, turned the pages of the receipts as she called for them, and held his grave tongue. And by the next dusk she had it, not a suspicion, but a thing as hard and plain as a broken axle, patient, expert theft, 4 years deep, the full toll taken at the wharf, and the rebate entered as returned and never given, every farthing certified true in the same fair confident hand. The muniment room was bright and high and full of the clean north light of a summer morning, and they were all there when she came in with her father's counting rule and her sheaf of casting sheets under her arm and the founding deed open on the table before her. The Duke stood at the end, still and closed. Mr. Silas Belcher stood beside the strong-box, a broad, well-fed man of 60 in a good brown coat, with the easy assurance of 20 unquestioned years and a small, indulgent smile. And a little apart stood Mr. Pike, the toll clerk of the ducal wharf, a thin, sweating, sallow young man who kept the day-book Belcher directed, and had taken, though no one yet knew it, a quiet weekly consideration for it, and he looked at Honoria coming in, and something behind the anxious face went very still and very sick. "Miss Vane," said the Duke, "you have had the day-book and the deed and the receipts a full day and a night. Say now, before us all, what you found, and let any man here fault it who can." Mr. Belcher laughed, a warm, comfortable, forgiving laugh, and spread his broad ringed hands. "Your Grace, I confess myself charmed." Her Grace's reader. It is very picturesque, and no doubt Miss Vane keeps the old lady's household book most neatly. But, forgive me, my good woman, the keeping of a great estate's accounts is not a thing one picks up copying out an abstract of an afternoon. It is the labor of a lifetime, and a canal's tolls are a tangle that has confounded better heads than, well, I have kept this book faithfully these 4 years, and rendered it true, and it has satisfied his Grace's own late father and brother and the estate's own auditor in London, whose name, your Grace, is upon every. Your book, Mr. Belcher, said Honoria, was rendered from the abstract you fair copied, which is rendered from the day book you directed Mr. Pike to keep. You did not weigh a single cart at the wharf with your own hand, nor carry a farthing of relief to a single tenant's door, for your trade is your word and your good name and not the labor of it. I have done a different thing. I have gone back to the day book, and the receipts, and the deed. She spread her casting sheets and the open deed on the long table, and set her brass counting rule at her hand. May I begin, your Grace? It will take the better part of an hour, if every man is to see it with his own eyes. But at the end of it there will be no doubt left in this room, and that is worth an hour of anyone's morning. Begin, said the Duke. She began. And here is the thing that undid Silas Belcher and turned the bright muniment room by degrees to silence. She did not accuse, and did not flourish, and raised her voice not at all. She simply showed them the figures. She laid her hand on the open founding deed, and read out, plainly, the young dead master's own written warrant, that there shall be allowed to every tenant of the canal side holdings a rebate of 1 halfpenny in the penny upon all tolls paid for the carriage of their own produce upon the said navigation, the same to be deducted at the wharf or repaid quarterly, in perpetuity. That is what your brother promised, your Grace, she said, in his own hand, and set his seal to, and it is as plain as a promise can be made. Half of every penny of toll, off the tenant's own carriage, forever. There is no arguing it. It is the deed of the estate, and she turned to the day book, the wharf's own daily record, thumbed and grease-marked and honest as such books are, and set it open beside Belcher's fair abstract. Here, your Grace, is what the wharf truly took. Every ton the canal-side tenants sent down these 4 years, weighed and told as the carts came, in Mr. Pike's own daily hand, and it is told full. Not a halfpenny of the rebate is deducted, the tenants paid the whole toll, penny for penny, as though your brother's deed had never been written. The relief was never allowed at the wharf. She turned the leaf. So it must, by the deed, have been repaid them quarterly. And here she laid her hand on the abstract, is where your book swears it was. Toll relief allowed to canal side tenants, per founding deed, paid in full. 4 years deep, a fair round sum entered as paid back. She lifted from her sheaf a thin bundle of foxed and crumpled papers tied with a bit of string. And here, your grace, are the receipts. The crossed receipts from the tenants' own cottage boxes, the widow Thorns, and the 2 Halloran brothers, and old Marsh at the timber staith, and 9 more that Mr. Dunmore gathered before dawn, every scrap of paper the estate's office ever gave them for money paid or money returned. And there is not one receipt among them, your grace, not one in 4 years, for a single farthing of rebate repaid. They paid their full toll at the wharf, as the day book shows. And they were repaid nothing, as their own boxes show. The relief was taken from them at the wharf and never given back, and yet the book swears it was paid in full. And last she came to the sum, the plain unregarded reconciliation at the foot of it that no one ever casts, where the honest truth of an account lives. And she laid her counting rule along the columns and added the toll truly taken against the relief truly returned. And here, your grace, is the thing that cannot be argued at all. An account is a sum, and a true sum closes. The book shows the rebate paid out of the tolls, a halfpenny in the penny, 4 years deep. But the wharf took the full toll. The tenants got nothing back, and the money the book says was repaid is in no tenant's hand and not in your coffers either. £640 over 4 years, taken from the poorest souls on your estate at the wharf, entered here as returned to them, and reaching neither them nor you. The deed says they were owed it, the day book says they paid full, the receipts say they got nothing, and the abstract says it was all paid back. 3 of those 4 are the ground itself and cannot lie. The 4th is a lie in a fair hand, and the difference is £640 that a man in this room has had. And so, your grace, she said at the last, laying down her father's counting rule on the open deed, it comes to this. This is not a true account of your canal. It is the work, and very careful work, of some patient hand that took the toll relief your brother promised the poor at the wharf, entered it in the book as repaid, and kept the difference. I cannot tell you whose pocket the £640 is in, but I can tell you it was taken. For the deed and the day book and the receipts and the failed sum, all 4 say so with one voice, and money knows neither how to flatter nor how to lie. The great muniment room was very quiet. Mr. Belcher had stopped smiling, the broad-ringed hands gone, still at his sides. The Duke stood looking at the deed and the day book and the little tied bundle of the poor's receipts, as though she had laid a live coal upon his table. "This is," Belcher began, and the warm voice had a thin edge in it now that had not been there before. "Your Grace, this is grotesque." A companion, a reader of novels to an old lady, has spent a night stumping through a wharf book she has no training to read and spun you a fairy tale of theft out of the ordinary honest muddle of a canal's accounts. For the tolls of a navigation are the most tangled business in England, and the rebate is a thing paid and reckoned a dozen honest ways, deducted here and carried forward there, and set against the wharfage yonder. And she has taken the natural crossings and carryings of the craft, and, not understanding them, cried theft. It is the error of the half-taught. She knows a little of adding, and nothing of the estate. And a little knowledge, sir, is the mother of exactly this kind of confident nonsense. You have it backwards, Mr. Belcher, said Honoria very quietly, and for the first time she looked full at him. It is not the tangle I lean on, it is the deed, that you did not write and cannot alter, and the receipts that are in the tenant's own hands and not yours, and the day book that was written cart by cart before ever an abstract dressed it. A canal's tolls may cross and carry a dozen honest ways, and I have looked for the rebate down every one, deducted at the wharf, carried forward, set against the wharfage, and it is on none of them. It is entered paid, and the tenants have no receipt for it, and it is in no man's hand it was owed to. That is not a tangle, sir, that is a theft with a fair copy laid over it. Send for the estate's auditor in London, or any honest accountant in England, and set him to cast that rebate against those receipts, and not one will read it different from me. For a halfpenny in the penny is a fact and not an opinion, and a sum either closes or it does not. You have not answered one figure I have shown. You have only told this room a woman cannot know it. That is not a rebuttal, sir. That is a man with nothing left to say. I have a fair idea what becomes of me, Mr. Belcher, said Honoria. You may have his grace turn me off this hour, without a character, and at my age that is very near a sentence of the workhouse, and I dare say you know it, and I find, on the whole, that I would rather be turned off for reading the truth of this book than kept on for holding my tongue while an honest master's own brother's promise to the poor was pocketed at the wharf, and the poor turned from the door as beggars. So there it is. I have cast the account. What his grace does with the casting is between him and his own eyes, and I'll trouble neither any further than he wishes. Mr. Belcher, he said, you have kept my canal these 4 years, and my father trusted you 20, and I inherited that trust with the rest of his estate and never questioned it. So I will ask you one plain thing, for I am done with warm ones. Take up her sheets now, before us all, and lay your own rule to that rebate, and cast me the relief the book says you paid against the receipts of the men you say you paid it to, and tell me to my face, does this account close, or does it not? Did the toll relief my brother promised reach one single tenant on this estate, or did it not? And Silas Belcher looked at the casting sheets, and at the little tied bundle of the poor's receipts on the open deed, and he did not put out his broad-ringed hand, because he did not dare, because he knew as well as she did what the sum would say, and the silence of his not daring went round the bright room like a cold draught, and was a plainer confession than any words. He had built 20 years of comfort and trust upon his good name and the fair copy no one ever checked, and a plain woman had asked him to cast his own rebate against a widow's receipts, and he could not, and everyone in that room saw it. I will not be catechized, he said at last, thickly, by a reader of novels, over a heap of grease-marked wharf scrawl and beggars' scraps. My accounts stand upon 20 years of trust, and my trust is— your trust, sir, said the Duke, has just declined to add up its own book. I have my answer. And he turned from Belcher as though the man had ceased to be in the room, and looked instead at Honoria. Miss Vane, if you are right, and it seems past doubting now that you are, then I have been robbed under my own roof, and my brother's dying promise to the poorest tenants he had was broken every quarter in my name. And £600 and more was taken from widows and small men at my own wharf, and I did not see it, because I trusted a brown coat and 20 years, and never troubled to add up my brother's mercy. Stay. Do not go back to my grandmother's sermons. There is a whole tangled business here. 4 years wrong, and God knows how much longer, that will want an honest reckoning, and the arrears restored to every soul that was cheated. And it appears there is only one honest reckoner in England within my reach. Will you do it?" "I'll do it, your grace," said Honoria Vane, gathering her father's counting rule and her sheets. "It will take the season to cast the whole 4 years true, and reckon every tenant's arrears to the farthing, and see them paid what they were owed. But it can be done by anyone with the patience to add the column and refuse to be dazzled by a good name. I'll give you back a true account of your canal, your grace. The smaller, honest earnings the book swelled with money that was never yours, and your tenants their relief again, and the arrears of 4 years besides, and you'll have less on paper and a clean name in truth, which is a fair bargain, though it costs £600 to learn it." Silas Belcher went out of the great muniment room with the ruin of his comfortable assurance hanging off him like a coat too big, and did not look at Honoria as he passed. And Pike the toll clerk went out a pace behind him, thin and sweating and saying nothing, already reckoning how much of his own weekly consideration might yet be kept covered. And Honoria stood in the clean north light with her father's counting rule in her hand, and thought, with a strange calm, "Well, that is done. The truth is out of the book and cannot be inked back over." She was wrong about that too, and this time for the rest of her life. For she did not go back to the reading desk. She was given the whole canal business to cast and set right, and through the long bright summer she worked back through the 4 years of tolls and rebates, quarter by quarter, and reckoned every canal side holding its arrears to the farthing, and saw the relief restored at the wharf going forward. And the Duke came down to the muniment room in the grey of the morning and the gold of the evening, and asked her questions, and, stranger yet, listened to the answers. And by degrees so small neither marked the moment, they fell into the strangest intimacy either had ever known, that of two solitary people bent over the same exact, honest work, where rank thins to almost nothing, and a grieving man cannot go on pretending the woman clearing his brother's broken promise is beneath his notice. His name, she learned, was Adrian. Not that she ever called him so, but she learned it, as one learns things at a shared task in the early dark, along with a great deal else he would never have told a fine lady across a drawing-room. "They are afraid of me," he said to her one grey afternoon, both of them in the muniment room while the rain ticked at the tall windows. "Every soul on this estate. I say a lease is renewed, and the new man agrees before the words are out of my mouth, and yet you never once flatter me. Even Dunmore, who is honest with me a little, has served my family 40 years and has his place to think of. Why do you not? Because Dunmore has something to lose by you, and I've nothing," said Honoria. "A counting rule and a pair of eyes that know a true sum, and the good name of Vane in Marlbrook, and not one of those is in your gift to give or take. A person who wants nothing from you, your grace, is the only one in the world who can afford to tell you the truth. You'd do well to keep one about you always. They're worth more than the soundest steward in 3 counties, and a deal harder to come by, and they don't send in a quarter's account." And she went to fetch the arrears book, and did not see the look on his face as she crossed the room, which was the look of a man quietly turning over a judgment he had thought long settled. They talked, in those weeks, more than either had talked to another living soul in years. And one grey afternoon, staring at the rain, he told her the thing he had told no one. "I was never meant for any of this," he said. "I was the second son, and told myself I did not envy my brother the whole of it. And then he was thrown from a boat in a spring flood on his own canal, and drowned in the water his own kindness had cut for the poor, and was dead before I could reach the house, and I came home to a half-managed name and a grief I could not put down. So I set out to put it all right, fast. And because I wanted so badly to trust the man my father trusted, I signed what a comfortable man in a brown coat put before me, and never asked the one soul under my roof who could read the book. And why is that, Your Grace? Honoria asked quietly, not looking up from the arrears she was casting, because she had learned that men say the truest things when they are not being looked at, because the ones who come close are generally after something, he said. The place, the money, the name. I learned it young, being the son who would inherit nothing, whom people were civil to only for what my brother might one day do for them. It is easier to keep everyone at arm's length than to let them near and always be wondering. He looked at her. But you will not take my money above your wage. You argue with me. You told me to my face that my own grief-blind haste let the theft in, and did not soften it. You are the first person in 20 years who has cost me nothing to be near, and I do not know what to make of you at all. I'll tell you what to make of me, she said at last. I'm a woman who found out young she had one thing worth having, that I could take a column of figures in my eye and read its whole truth in it, and never be gulled. Not beauty. You can see I've none. Not a fortune. My father died a bankrupt with the company's books seized off his own desk. Only that. And a person built entirely out of the one thing that can't be faked, for a sum cannot be flattered, loses the very trick of shading a figure to please a great man. I'm only a woman who tells the truth because it's the single thing I was ever good at. And I've grown too proud of it to give it up. For the household had begun to feel the change, and it pleased them less than it pleased her, since it upset the order of things they leaned upon, and Honoria felt the small silences when she passed. They think I'm reaching above myself, she said to Dunmore one morning, the two of them going over the arrears. They think I've got notions. Now I've the run of the counting house and His Grace's ear. They think, said Dunmore, looking up with his still grave eyes, what small people always think when they see one of their own singled out, that it must be by some trick, since it can't be by desert. For if it were by desert, then any of them might have earned it and did not, and there's no thought less comfortable than that one. He looked at her kindly. Pay it no mind, Miss Vane. You've saved an honest name from being staked on a theft, and a dozen poor households the relief a great man promised them, and a trusted servant stole, which 20 years of that servant either could not or would not do. If the house can't bear the sight of that, the fault's in the house. And he took up his sheet and went back to it, and left Honoria standing in the bright muniment room light, with a feeling that was not quite fear and not quite hope, understanding for the first time that she stood now between two worlds and belonged wholly to neither. A lonely place to stand, and one that would grow lonelier before it grew otherwise, if it ever did. The break, when it came in the servants' hall, over the bread and cheese of a wet noon, and it came from Mrs. Farley, the housekeeper, who had been swelling toward it for a fortnight. I'm sure, said the housekeeper, to the room at large but at Honoria in particular, in the voice of a woman who is not sure at all and means everyone to know it, I'm sure it's a fine thing to be so very thick with His Grace. A reader of sermons that came into this house with one box and a dead bankrupt's name. A fine thing. I only wonder that some folk find the time for their own proper work, with all this parading down to the counting house being consulted like a man of business. Her Grace has been asking twice this week who's to read her the new sermons and fetch her drops. But there, some of us keep grander company now. The room went still. The maids studied their bread. Honoria set down her knife. Her Grace's sermons, she said quietly. I read her at 6 each evening as I have these 11 years. Mrs. Farley and her drops are on her stand at the hours the doctor set, as you'd know if you'd asked her instead of the hall. I've not missed a duty to the old lady since the canal fell to me, for I do the one at night and the other by day and sleep the less, and that's my own affair. So let's have the true grievance, and not her Grace's drops, for the drops are given and we're neither of us fools. The true grievance, said Mrs. Farley, coloring, is that you've got above yourself, Nora Vane, and the whole house sees it but you. Being sent for by His Grace. Being asked your opinion, as if you were quality. As if all my years of keeping this household decent counted for nothing against a woman that pokes at old ledgers with a bit of brass. It isn't fitting. It isn't your place. And when it ends, as end it must, it's this hall you'll be crawling back to, and I only hope you'll not have made yourself too fine for the company you'll be glad enough of again. It was said in spite. But there was fear under the spite, the old deep fear of the below-stairs world, that one of its own, singled out, will forget the rest, and the order that shelters them all will crack. Honoria heard the fear under it, and it took the anger out of her, and she answered the fear and not the spite. I've not forgotten one soul in this hall, she said, and I'll not, whatever comes. I cast the figures for your own brother's benefit club when the treasurer had muddled them and the men thought their pennies lost and found the shillings that were only misadded and not gone, and set the club right, and never charged you a word of thanks for it. If His Grace asks my reading of an account, I give it, for it would be dumb insolence to hold my tongue when I know the answer. But I didn't seek it. I opened that book because Her Grace sent me to copy it, and I could not unsee what was wrong in it, and I'd have done as much for the poorest cottager cheated of a shilling. You may call that above myself if you like. I call it my trade, and I'll thank you not to make out that 11 years of keeping the old lady's book straight was poking at old paper. It is not nothing, he said, straightening from the shelf. You have the look you had the first morning, at the abstract. Tell me who has been unkind to you in my own house, and you'll do nothing, she said sharply. And then, gentler, you'll do nothing, Your Grace, if you've any care for me at all. If you take my part in that hall, you make it true. You make me the woman who has the Duke's ear, who need only murmur and a housekeeper of 30 years is turned off. You'd ruin me with the kindness. The only way I keep my place among them is to fight my own battles at my own table, on my own account, and not as your favorite. She said the word as though it were a doctored figure. Let me be. I've faced down harder rooms than a servant's hall. She set down her counting rule. Because a lord's favor is the plague to a woman like me. A great man takes a fancy to raise a servant, and the day the fancy passes, and it always passes, she's left with the hatred of everyone she was set above, and no place in any world. I swore long ago, watching fine words and easy trust ruin my father and then the company that broke him, that whatever I got I'd get by my own hand and hold by my own right, so no man's changing mind could take it from me. My rule is mine, my reckoning is mine, the good name of my work is mine, and no one can ungive it. Those are the only things truly safe, and I'll not trade them for your favor, which is here today and married to an heiress by this time 12-month. She stopped. Forgive me, I speak too plain. No, said the Duke, very quietly. No, you speak exactly plain enough. You always have. And he said nothing more that afternoon about defending her, and let her go to her columns when the light held, but he stood long after at the tall window in the dusk, turning over the words married to an heiress by this time 12-month, and finding, to his own alarm, that the picture they made of himself across a fine table from a pale, well-bred lady who would tell him his canal was all splendid, because she had never once cast a farthing of it, filled him with a flat gray dread he could not at first account for, and then could account for all too well. Silas Belcher was not so easily done with as a man caught out ought to be. The Duke, with no love of scandal upon his new name, and his brother a bare 3 months in the ground, had not yet made the fraud public nor set the law on his steward. And Belcher, with 20 years of reputation to save, spent that summer not in shame, but in building a defense. And his defense was not to deny the book. The deed and the receipts and the failed sum were past denying, but to deny the woman, to have the meddling companion who cast the theft shown a spiteful, half-taught spinster. So no gentleman in the county need ever believe her against a servant of standing. And in this he found ready allies, the toll clerk Pike, terrified of exposure, and the housekeeper Mrs. Farley, who nursed a grievance ripe for the using. Belcher came in the last week of July, when the arrears were near cast and the false book copied out true, and he came not humbly but in a bluster dressed as injured loyalty, with a sharp, cheap attorney from the county town beside him, resolved to fight where it would do most harm, in the open, before the household and the tenantry, where a plain woman might be shouted down by 20 years of trust. He swept into the muniment room, past the servants and canal-side tenants the Duke had gathered for the very purpose of paying out the first of the restored arrears, to where the Duke himself stood with Dunmore before the open arrears book. And Belcher, seeing the room full and the Duke arrested mid-floor, chose, being the kind of man he was, to fight before an audience. "Your Grace," he said, loud and rolling, sweeping off his hat, a whine of injury dressed as boldness. "I come for justice. I have been these 2 months a slandered man, my 20 years' faithful service cried down before the whole world. And on whose word? On the word of that woman there." And he flung out a ringed hand at Honoria, who had come to the muniment room with the arrears book under her arm and stopped dead. A reader of novels to an old lady, that no counting-house in England would take on as a junior clerk, an ignorant spinster who knows no more of an estate's business than the cat, and who out of spite and envy of her betters has cried theft upon accounts that satisfied your own father and his auditor for 20 years. Whoever gave a lady's companion leave to overrule the steward that keeps the books? I demand that she be turned off your estate before she poisons it further against every honest servant in it." "That's God's truth, your Grace," said Mrs. Farley thickly from the side of the room, not meeting Honoria's eye. 30 years I've kept this household, and never seen the like of a sermon reader set up over a trusted gentleman of business. It's not fitting. It's not right. Mr. Belcher's a sound man known everywhere. There's 2 sides to every tale, and we've only ever heard the one." She might have borne it in silence. She had borne a great deal in silence over 40 years. But the Duke had drawn breath to speak, and she saw in his face that he meant to defend her, to throw his newly inherited name and all his authority before his whole household and tenantry on a paid companion against a servant of 20 years' standing, and she could not let him, for it would cost him more than it saved her. A great man may keep an eccentric reckoner. He may not be seen to stake his honor on one against the steward his own father trusted, not without a whisper following him ever after that his grandmother's reader had bewitched him. She saw all this in the half-second before he spoke, and made her second life remaking decision as plainly as the first. So Honoria Vane laid her arrears book over the back of a chair, and folded her ink-stained hands in front of her gray gown, and defended herself. "Miss Belcher," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried the length of the bright room. because it did not shake. You say I am ignorant. I never claimed to be a trained man of business, and I am not. I could not show you a place in any counting house in London, nor keep a great estate its whole complicated year. I claimed one thing only, to know a sum, and a rebate, and a deed. And a sum is not an opinion, sir. It is a made thing, with a toll and a receipt and a total behind it, and those are facts. And facts do not care whether the person adding them wears a brown coat or a gray apron. She took a step into the room, and Silas Belcher, to his own surprise, took one back. You say I cried theft out of spite, she went on. Then send for other hands than mine. Send for His Grace's own auditor in London that passed your books 20 years, and let him cast that rebate against these receipts, and lay his rule to that day book, for I have here. And she drew from under her arm the founding deed, and the little tied bundle of the tenant's receipts, your late master's own founding deed, sealed in his own hand, that promises the relief in perpetuity, and the crossed receipts of the poor souls themselves, that show they never had a farthing of it. And no living man can argue with a dead master's sealed deed and a widow's own receipt box, nor with a rebate taken and never returned. Lay it before 10 honest accountants, and not one will read it different from me. It does not need me. I found it, but I am not it. You have come to put out the one eye that troubled to look, before it teaches the others to see. And you are too late. The silence in the great room was total. The summer light lay clean and gold along the polished floor, and the dust hung in it, and no one moved. Silas Belcher had gone the color of tallow. He opened his mouth and shut it, and looked, for the first time, directly at her. And what he saw in the plain gray capped face was not ignorance and not spite, but certainty, the terrible flat certainty of someone who is holding the truth and knows exactly how heavy it is, and exactly how many honest accountants in England can now be sent for to lift it beside her. His attorney, a sharp man who had come out on a rich brief and now smelled, all at once, a hopeless case, and a client who had lied to him, leaned and murmured something urgent in his ear, and Belcher's tallow face went a shade grayer. This is, said Belcher, and the roll had gone thin as water. This is a conspiracy. A pack of canal-side beggars, greedy for a rebate they half forgot they were owed, will swear whatever a spiteful woman of their own low kind desires. No gentleman's court would credit a parcel of Lime-Wharf paupers and a bankrupt clerk's daughter against the accounts of a steward of 20 years' standing that a London auditor has. Then you've nothing to fear from the auditor, sir, said Honoria, and no reason to want me turned off before he can be sent for. A man easy in his figures does not tremble when a reader offers to set his account before the whole profession, he says. Send for him. He'll clear me. I notice you've not said it. You came here to have me put out of this room before anyone else learns to cast what I cast in your book. You're too late, Mr. Belcher. His Grace has read it now, and Mr. Dunmore, and the household has seen you decline to add up your own rebate, a confession the whole hall understood. And the poor at your wharf, she nodded to the tenants gathered by the door, are the plainest witnesses of the lot, and their receipt boxes will cast the same to the last honest farthing in England as they cast to the first. I see, said Belcher, and his voice had gone to a thread, that His Grace's house has been poisoned against a man of 20 years' faithful trust. He shot a look at Mrs. Farley, who had gone gray and was staring at the floor, having grasped a beat too late that her ally was drowning and would pull her down with him. I'll not stay to be lectured on the accounts by a reader of sermons. Your Grace, I wish you joy of your lady reckoner. When she has cried down every honest servant on the estate and left you with a business no gentleman will manage, you'll remember I warned you. My attorney will be in touch. Good day." He went. He turned on his heel and swept down the length of the bright room and out at the great door, his sharp attorney a half step behind him, already talking low and fast about withdrawing from the brief, and the sound of his chaise driving off went up between the office walls and came back down, and Honoria Vane stood in the enormous quiet with her hands folded and her heart going hard, and thought, with a strange calm, "Well, that is done. Now I shall be turned off too, for a great house cannot easily keep the companion who shamed the steward its old master trusted." "Miss Vane," said the Duke of Ashworth, and it was the first time in 11 years anyone in that house had put a Mrs. near her name and meant it as an honor, "will you come into the counting-house closet where it is quiet? There is a great deal I find I wish to say to you, and I had rather not shout it the length of my own muniment room in front of the tenants." She left the arrears book over the chair and went with him into the small warm closet at the room's end, where the estate's older ledgers and the sealed papers were kept. Mrs. Farley, by the wall, sat down heavily on the edge of a window seat, a woman who has bet her standing on the wrong man and knows it. Pike the toll clerk slipped out at the far door and was, within the week, gone from the estate altogether, his part never openly named, but perfectly understood. And Dunmore, at the Duke's heel, allowed himself the ghost of a smile, and then, being Dunmore, cleared the room of gaping servants and tenants with 3 low words and a look, so that whatever passed in the closet should at least pass unwitnessed, though not before he had seen the first of the widows paid her 4 years' arrears in good coin at the table, and counted it into her shaking hands himself. He shut the door. The room was full of the low gold light of a summer afternoon, falling across the shelves of ledgers and the one small window that looked down the home park, and Honoria stood in the middle of it with her hands folded and waited to be thanked and pensioned and sent away, and had her whole speech ready, how she would go without fuss, how she asked only a character, that she might find another place that wanted a woman who could cast a true account. He offered her, first, money, a sum that made her sit down without meaning to. She refused it. He offered next to make her keeper of the estate's accounts in name and in fact both, over any man of business in England, with a proper salary and rooms of her own, and the freedom of the counting-house for life, and this she did not refuse, but she did not answer either, because she could see in his face that it was not what he had brought her into the closet to offer, and that he was working his way toward the true thing by the road of easier things. "Adrian," she said then, more quietly. She had never used his name and did not know she was going to, and the sound of it stopped him as though she had laid a hand flat on his chest, and he turned. "There, I've said it once, and the roof's not fallen. Now you say your piece, and I'll say mine, and we'll neither of us be cowards about it, for I'm too old to be courted round the houses, and you're too honest to enjoy the doing of it." So he said it, plainly, in the plain words they both trusted. "You stood in my muniment room an hour ago," he said, "and you would not let me defend you. Do you know why that undid me, Nora, when nothing else in 20 years has? Because I saw what you were doing. You saw, quicker than I did, that if I spent my name on you before the whole household they would say you had bewitched me, and you would sooner take the weight of that man's slander and be turned out onto the road than let it cost me my standing. A servant with nothing protected a duke with everything, and meant to walk out of my life without letting me so much as thank her. And I stood there and understood that in my whole guarded life I have never once been loved by a person who wanted nothing from me. and that I was about to let her go. I am not offering you rank, he went on, and the level voice went for a moment unsteady. Rank is nothing. It came to me out of my brother's drowning, and brought me a half-managed name in a business I nearly signed a theft into law to make it shine. I am offering you the only thing I have found worth the giving, a partnership of equals in the plain sight of God, my name to yours, my judgment laid open to your plain sense every day we both live. Spend what's left of our days keeping me honest, for no one else alive is willing to try, and I cannot go back to being flattered. You have shown me the difference between being served and being loved, and a man cannot unsee that. And I will not have any woman in England but the one who taught it to me across a table of books. Honoria Vane was 40 years old, and she had prided herself her whole life on having no illusions, and she discovered in that little room that she had been nursing the largest illusion of all, the one that told her that a woman like her was not permitted, by God or the world, to be simply and fully loved for exactly what she was. There will be a great scandal, she said, when she could speak. There will, he agreed, a magnificent one. The dowagers of the whole county will take to their beds. I find I am looking forward to it. They'll say you married your grandmother's reader. They'll say I trapped you, or bewitched you, or cried down an honest servant to make myself needful and creep from the reading desk into your rooms. They'll say it of me till I die, and some of them after. You know they will. You've lived among them. You know exactly what they are. I do, he said. I know them to the bone. And I do not care a straw for the opinion of people I do not respect upon a matter they cannot understand, concerning the only happiness I have ever been offered. They will say the Duke of Ashworth married the woman who found the theft his trusted steward hid for 4 years, and gave a dozen poor households back the relief his own brother promised them, with nothing but an old counting rule and the courage to add up a sum every clever man had trusted. Let them say it. It is even true. And he held out his hand to her, not a lord's hand offered to be kissed, but a plain hand offered to be taken. Palm up, level, between equals. Nora, I have asked you a question. You have never in your life left an honest question unanswered to spare a person's feelings. Do not begin now. And Honoria Vane, reader to the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, looked at the offered hand, and at the gray eyes that had learned, at 42, not to lie to her, and she gave him the truth, as she had given him nothing but the truth from the first morning, because the truth was the only dowry she had ever owned, and it turned out to be the only one he had ever wanted. Yes, she said. God help us both. Yes, they were married in the small gray parish church at the edge of the home park, quietly, in the first week of September, with the harvest in and the whole scandalized county watching from behind its curtains, and not one of them invited. Dunmore gave the bride away, and thought his old heart would crack with the rightness of it, and Mrs. Farley wept through the whole service, and the old Dowager Duchess, who might have been the loudest against the match and was instead the shrewdest for it, rapped her stick on the flags and told the whispering pew that her grandson had done the one sensible thing of his life and married the only person in the house with a head on her shoulders. And when the plain vows were said, the little church was so still they could hear the rooks in the elms, and more than one hard old tenant, come to Gop and stayed to be moved, said afterward that the silence when the reader became the Duchess of Ashworth was the silence of a whole small world quietly rearranging itself around a truth it had not seen coming. She never played the great lady, and never tried to. She wore good plain gowns and no jewels, and kept her father's worn brass counting rule and his old canal day book, and her ivory-tabbed account slope in her writing-table drawer, and went down to the counting-house most mornings to keep the estate's books true in her own hand. And Silas Belcher, when word of the case spread, found his 20 years' good name worth nothing, and every door in 3 counties shut to him, and ended his years small and shabby and disbelieved, which is a colder ruin than any prison. And the estate he had quietly robbed came, under an honest reckoning, to be known as the cleanest dealing in the shire, the smaller for being true, and the greater for it. She trained clever young women under her, craftsmen's and tenants' grown daughters with quick eyes and no prospects, and taught them to cast a column and read a deed and reckon a true account, and never be gulled by a fine word or a trusted name. And she saw to it, first of all, and every quarter after, that the canal-side tenants had their relief at the wharf to the halfpenny, as a dead man had promised them. And the widow Thorne of the Lime Wharf lived to keep her little trade, and never knew to her dying day that it was the grey woman who read the old Duchess her sermons that had saved it. And she and the Duke were the most quietly contented couple in the shire. And his Grace, who had come into his title grief hollowed and shut as a locked room, had become a man at ease in his own skin, who could laugh and be argued with, and looked at his unlikely Duchess as though he could not quite believe his own good fortune. He lived another 30 years, the same span, she once remarked, that she had read his grandmother's sermons unregarded, and died at last in his own bed. His hand in her ink stained one and no stranger in the room. She sat with him at the end as she had sat with his brother's broken promise at the beginning, still and true, and told him the truth to the last, which was that he had been a great deal of trouble and worth every hour of it, and he laughed his quiet laugh one final time, and told her she was the one true thing he had ever owned, and slept, and did not wake, and she closed his grey eyes herself, and did not weep until the door was shut. She outlived him by 7 years, and kept the estate's books true to the end, and was, by the time she followed him, so beloved across that whole broad reach of shire that they lined the lanes for her funeral 3 deep. Tenants and carriers and the households of the women she had taught to cast a column and read a true account, far more than ever lined them for any duke, and among them not a few of the fine folk who had once scorned her and lived long enough to be ashamed of it. And they carried behind her coffin, on a cushion, her father's worn brass counting rule and his old canal day book, which the whole shire agreed was a stranger honor than any crest, and no more than her due. There is an old saying among the toll clerks of the canal country that a fine hand may fare a column and a great name may swear to it, but a sum will only ever tell you what it truly is, and the whole art of an honest reckoning is to know the one from the other. Honoria Vane read the sermons at Ashworth for 11 years before anyone above the housekeeper troubled to learn her name, and for 30 years after as its mistress, and never once called a false figure true to spare a great person's feelings. She was not saved by her meekness, nor by her beauty, for she had neither. She was saved, if saved is the word for the woman doing the saving, by the plain, unfakeable fact of what she knew, and by the courage to stake everything on it in a world forever dazzled by the trusted name. And that was the whole of her, and it made her the truest reckoning in the county. The poor whose tolls she cast honest said it first, and the tenants after, and in the fullness of years even the great folk who had scorned her came to say it too, until it was less an opinion than a fact of the country, worn smooth with saying, that a plain gray-gowned woman with ink on her fingers had traced a fortune of stolen relief back through 4 years of doctored books, and read the theft in the very columns, and told nothing but that truth to a grieving duke, and it made her the truest reckoning in the county. And it was said of her, long after, Whenever a proud man was flattered to his ruin, or a wise woman overlooked for her plainness, that she had found with an old brass rule and a knight's patience what a trusted man had sworn for 20 years was true and exact, and it made her the truest reckoning in the county. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one. Honoria Vane, a spare, plain, dignified Englishwoman of about 40 in early 1800s Regency England, with fair indoor skin, dark hair going early to gray at the temples, bound back simply without ornament beneath a plain cap, a calm, level, resolute gray gaze that can hold a running total across a page of small figures and rarely smiles and never fawns, and quick, competent, ink-stained fingers steadied by a lifetime of pens and counting rules. She wears a single-tone, deep crimson-red day gown with a plain gray shawl and a working apron in her working scenes, in the closing scenes as Duchess. Well-cut plain gowns in quiet tones with no jewels to speak of, still keeping her worn brass counting rule, her father's canal day book, and her ivory-tabbed account slope in her writing table drawer. She carries herself with unhurried, unassuming authority and moves quietly, as one used to long exact hours at the reading desk and the accounting table. Clearly, an adult. Adrian, Duke of Ashworth, a tall, spare, still aristocratic Englishman of about 42, dark-haired, with a fine, austere face worn thin by an unshown grief, good bones drawn stern and controlled, cool gray eyes that give nothing away, filling back to an upright, at ease strength by the close. He wears a plain but well-cut dark tailcoat, white cravat, dark breeches and boots, the manner of a man who keeps everyone at arm's length, hands often clasped behind him. A low, level, exact voice, a guarded, appraising, unfawning manner that thaws only with her. Clearly an adult. Dunmore, a lean, upright Englishman of about 55 with the still watchfulness of a lifetime in great houses, short iron gray hair, a spare weathered face, and a grave, unhurried voice. Wears a sober dark coat, plain and correct. Discreet, watchful, unshakable, clearly an adult. Silas Belcher, a broad, comfortable, well-fed Englishman of about 60 in a good brown coat, with a great seal ring, broad-ringed hands, a warm, indulgent voice, and a superior smile that curdles to tallow-faced fear when he is asked to lay his own rule to the rebate and add up his own margin. Not a cartoon villain, a plausible, trusted, patient fraud, dangerous through long deference and unquestioned reputation rather than open malice. Clearly an adult. Mr. Pike, a thin, anxious, sallow Englishman of about 35 in a plain clerk's coat, ink at the cuffs, always a little damp with nerves. Clearly an adult. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, a small, upright, formidable old Englishwoman of 81 with bright missing-nothing eyes, a stick she raps for emphasis, and the plain good sense of a woman who nursed an estate through 2 weak masters. Rich but unshowy black silks, and a lace cap. Clearly an adult. Mrs. Farley and Bess Coker, supporting household figures. Clearly adults. Plain period working dress. Plus old Trewin the under-butler, the canal-side tenants, carriers, wharf men and tradespeople of the Marlbrook Canal country, the sharp hired county attorney, and the county gentry and dowagers of early 1800s England who first scorn and slowly come to revere the Duchess, all clearly adults in period dress. Approximate position in script, nigh 50% description. The story turns from overlooked servant summoned to a hopeless case into 2 solitary equals who cannot unknow each other at the exact moment the theft is cast out in the open, and Nora is kept on to re-reckon the whole 4 years and restore the tenant's arrears, when she is no longer merely the Duke's last resort against a fraud he could not see, but the one person in his house who will contradict him, and both of them privately recognize, without a word for it, that the truce of the muniment room and the counting house has become something neither is permitted to want. For the first stretch the frame is duty and hierarchy, a grieving lord, a half-managed name, a paid companion who dares carry a wrong to the valet and then to the Duke, and means, sensibly and without self-pity, to set the account right, and then go quietly back to her sermons and her upper servant's wage. The hinge is the run of counting house and muniment room dialogues across the summer. You do not flatter me. A person who wants nothing from you is the only one who can afford to tell you the truth. His confession that he signed what a comfortable man in a brown coat put before him because he wanted so badly to trust the man his father trusted and never asked the one soul on his staff who could read the book. Her plain accounting of a life built entirely out of one unfakeable competence through which the power imbalance quietly inverts. The Duke, who has everything, realizes he is the poorer of the two, that he cannot say what he is worth the way she can cast a column, and that she is the first person in 20 years who costs him nothing to be near and will not lie to him. The twist is that the very qualities that made her invisible for 11 years, her plainness, her low birth, her sex, her refusal to flatter or to call a false figure true, her stubborn allegiance to the literal fact of toll and rebate and closing sum, turn out to be the exact and only things this particular guarded, grief-hollowed, self-reproaching man has been starving for his whole life. The mockery lane does not merely fade, it curdles into Belcher's returning slander and the county's scandal and then inverts entirely into reverence, and the withheld payoff that he marries her, never leaves her side, and the marriage the drawing-room swore would sour outlasts them all, pays off from 90–70% through the serene closing vindication, the mechanism named at last only in the refrain. Cold open aphorism. A fine hand may fare a column, and a great name may swear to it, but a sum will only ever tell you what it truly is. For a gentleman will believe whatever his eye is pleased to read, and a farthing of honest account cares nothing for who owns the book, and the whole art of an honest reckoning is to know the one from the other. The trusted word versus the figures and the woman who reads past it, planted as the thematic engine in the first breath, before any scene. The unfakeable skill established, raised at a canal toll clerk's desk before the company failed and broke her father, Nora reads a column of figures the way her hand adds of its own accord. 14 ton, at 3 pence the ton, less the halfpenny rebate. Competence and the exact object set long before it is tested on the Duke's doctored book. The hook open loop, sent merely to copy a fair abstract for the Dowager, she cannot unread what she copies. The standing rebate entered paid in full against tenants she knows have never had a farthing of it. But they have not had it, and names the theft line by line. The account is not sound. It is a lie inked to look exact. The demonstrated skill opens the loop the whole story rides on. Her late father's worn brass counting rule plus, his canal day book plus the ivory-tabbed account slope, the inherited emblems of the honest trade learned at the desk, carried through to the closing scenes where they lie in the Duchess's own writing table drawer, and the rule and day book are borne on a cushion behind her coffin. The founding canal deed plus the tenant's crossed receipts plus the failed reconciliation kept in evidence. I have here your late master's own founding deed, sealed in his own hand, that promises the relief in perpetuity, and the crossed receipts of the poor souls themselves, that show they never had a farthing of it, and no living man can argue with a dead master's sealed deed and a widow's own. Receipt box, A halfpenny in the penny is a fact and not an opinion, and a sum either closes or it does not. The knowledge of a lifetime becomes the weapon that saves both the estate and her own dignity. It does not need me. I found it, but I am not it. The class gap confrontation plus dignity beat. Rather than let the Duke spend his newly inherited name defending a paid companion against a steward of 20 years' standing and his attorney, she folds her hands and defends herself before the whole household and tenantry, protecting him at cost to herself, the act he later says undid him, and the true hinge of the reversal. With the doctored book cast out true, and any honest accountant in England as the standing witnesses. Serene vindication refrain, the timeless love equivalent one-line refrain, and it made her the truest reckoning in the county, lands on the demonstrated skill theme and is repeated to close, exactly as timeless love repeats, and it made all the difference. And matching episodes 1-5's own repeated closer. Word count nilil 12,600 timeless love formula cloned faithfully and matched to the channel's own episodes 1-5. Overlooked low-born woman plus the Duke. Competence hook opens the loop. Quiet dignity closes it. Single third-person literary narrator, not drifted toward any of our other channels' fresh episode. Different from episodes 1-5. Eep 1 Clook, a still room maid / herbalist who exposes the Duke's poisoning physician. Eep 2 Clook, a huntsman's daughter horse gentler who reads the torture in the Duke's killer stallion. Eep 3 Clook, a steward's daughter reckoner who reads the theft in the estate's rigged ledger. Eep 4 Clook, a ruined weaver's daughter mending woman who reads the forgery in the Duke's priceless tapestries. Epi 5 Kilks, a ruined surveyor's daughter plan copier who reads the theft in the Duke's rigged enclosure survey. Epi 6 Kilks, a ruined canal clerk's daughter lady's companion who reads the theft in the Duke's doctored canal toll accounts and exposes the long-trusted defrauding land steward. New role, new UN fakeable competence / edger forensics on canal tolls. Toll versus. Tonnage. The deed-warranted rebate. The crossed tenant receipts. The daybook. The failed reconciliation cast on the open table before witnesses where it cannot be faked. New antagonist, new object motif, new grief engine for the Duke's central wrong is done to the powerless. The theft is the poorest canal side tenant's promised toll relief, defrauded at the wharf. The heroine restores the tenants their 4-year arrears and the standing rebate. The emotional payoff is a wrong to the powerless uncovered and set right. Not merely an estate's private loss holds the channel's sharpest angle. The overlooked older woman fused with a concrete UN fakeable competence, dignity through demonstrated skill. Not merely patience opens on an aphorism / stated rule cold open, then drops in media res into the morning room scene. Not a date place stamp high dialogue, Bess, the Dowager's commission. The approach to Dunmore, the muniment room summons, the account casting reveal, the summer counting house / muniment sparring, the confessions, the Farley servants' hall quarrel, the Belcher confrontation, and the counting house closet proposal are carried in extended spoken exchanges. A Regency drama, not a documentary read-long courtship under constraint middle. The bright summer of casting the 4 years and paying the arrears. The servants' hall reaching above herself pressure. Dunmore's quiet allyship. The Duke asking her judgment outside her station. The class barrier as the sustained constraint class barrier confrontation plus dignity beat at 90-70% serene vindication closes on one repeated one-line refrain. And it made her the truest reckoning in the county, stated then repeated in the final 2 paragraphs clone channel ending. Soft, warm, 3-beat geo invitation at the very end, matched to the exemplar. Not a forced house subscribed CTA, Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one. Thank you plus which city plus soft subscribe 20 title variants, #1 Turk locked H1, all 100 chars, M-hinge on every title, the Duke present in most, class status gap front-loaded plus unfakeable competence hook, payoff withheld, no question mark ending steady H1, 100 chars, #thumbnail is clean, pure, positive prose, no text/arrows, labels/watermark, no negative prompt block, heroine on the left third in single tone deep crimson red at the open ledger with her brass counting rule, the Duke on the right third in black tailcoat watching her at her competence from beside a wall of deed boxes, deliberate gap between them, status gap staging, dense Regency signaling, rendered as a bright sunlit daytime interior, contains the exact phrase bright vivid daylight, ends exactly bright vivid daylight, photorealistic cinematic. No child, children/girl, boy, son, daughter/baby, infant, toddler/teen kid/pupil/student token anywhere in the prompt numbers written as words for TTS in the script body. No bare numerals in the narration 1 animation plus 10 images format honored. #hook prompts left as empty ID first shell and #image prompts left as empty ID first shell for the sync pipeline to fill. No hook image prompts handwritten. #meta channel name Dekuk His Grace and Her Quiet. Narrator voice ID Cook TZ Yep G Ga Q Megs MEXJK filter safe. Clear adults only. No minor depicted or named anywhere. No child, girl/boy, son, daughter/baby in thumbnail or #character_Bible. No brands, logos/real people. Regency early 1800s. No real historical figures 11 sections present in exact order. None merged. ID first shells. Copy button script identical to the validated structure exemplar midpoint twist present. Object motif callbacks, Stex 7. All character Bible names used in the script.